Partly, I mean, we were based in Nashville for 5 years, and then the pandemic kicked in, and it also looked like Donald Trump would try to re-elect himself, which is a frightening prospect, and he did, in fact, try to re-elect himself. So we were kind of, we were right to imagine that. But our business is still based in Nashville, and we go over there a lot. So I've no idea, unless a severe lockdown intervenes where you just can't move, we're liable to be anywhere, really.
Is it being in the U.S. under Trump as a foreigner? Because, it seems like I don't know that the UK is in a much better position at the moment.
Well, we don't have guns and Jesus. So we've got two things. There are two very toxic factors. Nothing against Jesus himself, but most people generally the more people profess to be a follower of Jesus, the less Christian they are. But whatever they call themselves, they're a menace. And the alliance of the sort of kind of a godless pirate like Donald Trump and a bunch of fanatics like the religious right in America. We don't have that in Britain. We have a lot of the other ills. And, Britain's been a satellite of the States since World War II. Whatever happens in the States is going to be recast in Britain. So it doesn't look great either place. But I think, I don't really think, I just feel, I think everybody I know how many people were deeply horrified when first nobody believed Donald Trump would be elected. Then suddenly he was. Then everybody was in shock. At least the world survived and America sort of survived 4 years of him. But the fallout from Trump, witnessed the whole thing with the Supreme Court, seems to be pretty endless. Ironically, if Donald Trump re-elects himself, we're less likely to have a superpower confrontation between the States and Russia because Trump is one of Putin's men. So it might keep the peace more, but you know more. I mean, my comments are general and they don't come from any close scrutiny of politics. Tennessee is a red state, but Nashville is full of blue thinking folks.
Broad strokes, I think that's spot on. And it is interesting. Nashville is one of those places like Austin, Texas, or Athens, Georgia, where it's almost this oasis.
Yeah, Tucson, Arizona. All those, the Chapel Hill and all that lot, in North Carolina. I mean, it's a phenomenon because it's the town versus country thing, which is exactly the same in Britain. The town is like 150 years ahead of the countryside. If you disenfranchised everybody who lived more than 50 miles from water, you'd never have a right-wing government again anywhere. Except, of course, then you've got all the righteous folks in Athens and Nashville and, all the other, and Tucson, all the inland places in the States. But whatever it is, the gap between the town and country is enormous. And time has moved very fast. It's moved too fast for everybody. I think whatever side you're on, and I would say it's very hard not to be on one side or the other now. Time has moved too fast for us. Where are you from?
I'm from San Francisco originally. And obviously from one bubble to another, but when I moved out here to New York, the thing that really amazed me was how quickly outside of the city it turns into the country. And these days, how quickly outside of the city, it's Trump signs and it's MAGA and it's everything else. It's really just, maybe 20 minutes outside of New York City and you hit that.
Yeah. When I very first started hanging out with the REMs, I remember Peter Buck saying to me, "Wow, you get 30 miles outside of Athens and it's a very different business. You don't want to go to those gas stations." It's been borne in upon me for a very long time that you stay inside your bubbles, really.
That's right. And also something that I'm trying to be mindful of, and I think people are hopefully right-thinking people are generally, is that your experience 30 minutes outside of Athens is going to be different than, a person of color's experience 30 minutes outside of Athens.
Yes. Well, right. I mean, there's all this, exactly. There's all these different subgroups, and everybody's kind of suspicious of everybody else. Yeah.
What brought you to Nashville in the first place?
Well, I recorded a record there with Gillian Welch and Dave Rawlings in 2004, called Spooked. And that was my first encounter with East Nashville. And then when I met Emma 10 years later, she had moved to Nashville from Australia, and we moved around a fair bit, as is our wont. We're both quite mobile people. So we lived all over the place and actually nowhere for 6 months, just lived out of 2 suitcases. But we settled in Nashville again in a couple of years later, 2014, 15. And, Gil and Dave were there, and Brendan Benson had been in touch with me already, and he was there. Grant Lee Phillips just moved there from California. So I had 3 kind of musician people I already knew, sets of people, well, for Gil and Dave. So I already had a bit of a network of people to play with. And it seemed like a great place to be, and it still is as regards recording. I know far more musicians in Nashville than I do in London, and I'm much more likely, if I make another record, to go there. So Emma and I use the same rhythm section, the Johns, Radford and Estes. It's just, it's what it says on the label. It's just full of great musicians.
You said if I make another record, not when I make another record.
Well, I'm 70 next year. And at this point, I think every record you make is potentially your last. It took me 5 years to get this one out. And although I wrote most of the songs 2 years ago, it's still a slow process, what with pressing plants and all that. And I've now got Patreon set up, which means that if I write a song, I can do a reasonable demo of it and put it up there. And it means that if you really want to follow the Hitchcock story, it's up there, and I've got a songwriting habit. My main thing is just writing songs. Everything I do is designed to pay for me to keep writing songs. I do the online show with them. I still do some live dates. I have Patreon going. I sell artwork. The thing where I am most comfortable in life, or not just comfortable, but the thing that absorbs me, the way a fisherman is absorbed by fishing, or a golfer is absorbed, or a surgeon is absorbed by surgery, whatever it is. For me, it's writing songs. So, and I don't really, I want them to do as well as they can, but I'm really into just actually getting the things down in a basic form. Making a record is more complicated and expensive, and that's fun too. But it's so. I mean, I'm sure if the machinery is all running and the world is still here in another 2 or 3 years, and the budget is there, I will shuffle over, to the Nashville Cats and say, "Here we are. Who's going to produce this one then?" And they're brilliant because you can play them a song that you've just finished, and they'll make it sound like you've been playing it together for 6 months. Those people they make you seem authentic. I love that. I'm a scruffy guy, and my demos are all full of dust and hairs and rusty springs, but those people just make it sound whoosh like it's a real record.
This notion that any record could potentially be your last, which obviously is the case just generally, regardless of what age you are, but
especially now, yeah.
But yeah, it becomes, I guess, more and more so the case as you get older. Obviously a kind of a melancholy thought, but does that change the math of your songwriting and the album that you're putting out? Does it make it, is there more gravity in specific songs, or, does it make you want to put more stuff in the world while you still have time to do so?
Definitely the latter. I think, I got to get these songs out, even if they're just 4-track demos. I'll put them up on Patreon. Boy, the world can't end without my 736 Patreons hearing this latest demo. And left to my own devices, if I had the time and the budget, I'd do them all professionally with the Nashville Cats. But it would be a hefty process financially, and But in terms of, you mean gravity in terms of the songs? You mean the sense of?
Yeah, in terms of making each one count, I suppose.
I probably should think like that, but I think if I got self-conscious, if I thought, man, I've really got to deliver with this one, it would shut me up. What I have learned over the years is to anything that occurs to me, I write it down, and then I try and sing it, and then we go from there. So like the latest record, I don't think that's got suffering from too much gravity. There's simply a bunch of sub-personalities that came bubbling through in 2020 apropos of nothing. When I started, we didn't even know about the pandemic. As far as I knew, I was just going to spend the rest of my life on the road, and suddenly I was in a hotel in Florida, and out came the feathery serpent god. And then, a few songs in, I was locked down, but they were coming out by then. So out they came, and I had time and a 4.5 track machine on which to record them. So I was blessed, We finished Emma's record, and she put that out, and she got the whole Tiny Ghost off the ground. The songs, the most recent ones I've been writing, there seems to be an awful lot of sort of old age stuff in it. But I just, if that's what I'm writing, then so be it. I've always had a melancholy streak in my songwriting, just as I've had a daft streak. I wouldn't sacrifice either. I think I certainly have to have the two to create a balance. Also, I think, all the great songs are melancholy, really, unless you're Paul McCartney.
That was kind of the magic of the Beatles. This is a very elementary reading of it, but those two personalities contrasting one another. It sounds like there's an effort to emulate that, because you love a good pop song, but there is an underlying melancholy current to it.
I think when it's really good, whether it's from me or anybody, it's when you manage to get them both in a song. That's why I go back to my archetypal, my matrix, is Visions of Johanna by Bob Dylan. You know that one?
Yeah, of course.
which is, I mean, it's profound. It's bottomlessly profound, if you like, but it also has things like, geez, I can't find my knees in it. You know, the one with the mustache, say, geez, I can't find my knees. You know, and you've got, name me someone who's not a parasite, and I'll go out and say a prayer for them. And you've got, you know, inside the museums, infinity goes up on trial. You've got all that, but you've just got to, he kind of goes in both directions at once. And I think that's, for me, that's the template of a great song. Generally, I only wind up in one direction, and they never really go that far, probably because I'm so impatient. I just start new songs rather than refining the ones I have. But I'm always hoping I'll get it. You know, I sort of throw a lot of darts and hope I'll hit a dartboard.
You used the word sub-personalities earlier, and I'm curious what that means in this context.
See, I don't normally know what my songs are about for sometimes 20 years. I'm now getting really good on what I was doing in the 80s. I can see what I was at, what my subconscious was telling me. This song is about bringing the baggage from old relationships into a new relationship. Whoa, fancy that. Whereas at the time, I'm a real servant to what comes through. I'm submissive to my unconscious. I don't challenge it. I sort of take dictation. So the Shufflemania came through, the feathery serpent god and the shuffle man and the Scorpio detective and the midnight tram from nowhere and Socrates and the Satomi shovel, the mythical British pub and things. And looking at them all to find a common theme, they seem to be, if they're not sub-personalities of me, they're definitely sub-personalities. You could sort of put them in a cartoon strip together. They're almost like a bunch of superheroes. I can imagine the feathery serpent god going off on a quest with the Satomi shovel, you know, like Green Lantern and the Flash or something.
Or the Balloon Man.
The Balloon Man. Well, the Balloon Man years ago, the Balloon Man, I don't know if he was a superhero or a super villain or just a sort of super nuisance, but the Balloon Man's more like something that the Joker would have used, you know. I think he, you know, that sort of thing. He would have been deployed by somebody else. But I don't know if the Balloon Man actually had enough of an identity to be a supervillain. But I can imagine somebody deploying the Balloon Man, pressing a button, and out he comes. You know? And there's more of them. Oh my God! Look, they're coming off. They're up 6th Avenue, and they're coming along 44th. Jeez, you know.
They're the flying monkeys from The Wizard of Oz.
Well, that sort of thing. Yeah.
There's a degree of abstraction here. I mean, are they characters, or are they just an approximation of a feeling almost?
Well, maybe you approximate a feeling enough, and it becomes a character. So, I mean, that's what the gods were, in a way. You know, the gods were weather conditions and impulses, lust, jealousy, rain. And I think, you know, one of the reasons we have moods is because we've grown up on a planet with weather. I suspect that if we'd just grown up in a planet with icy blue sky or, you know, didn't change, I don't think we'd be like that. I mean, you know, everyone knows that the moon affects menstrual cycles and the tides and crabs and stuff. But I feel like the whole thing weather is very emotional. So I think we as creatures, centuries gone by, maybe fashioned characters out of feelings, if you like. And so God knows, maybe all my characters on Shufflemania are my own feelings, which would make me more emotional than I think I am.
It's interesting, and it does seem to be a bit of an exchange. It's been a very long time since I've taken a poetry class. Not since college, but there's the trope of the pathetic fallacy, it's called, which is sort of in the opposite direction, where you imbue the weather with your own emotions.
You look at
the sky is crying, for example.
Oh, you mean you look at the sky in emotional terms. Well, that would make sense, if that's one of the things, if that's one of the sources of our emotions anyway, then to some extent we'd be acknowledging it. But, like moods can be pretty tidal.
I've been thinking a lot about metaphor or symbolism in abstraction. To me, they play very similar roles wherein, and I know you're a painter as well, wherein there's a sense in which it's the job of the artist, whether it's poetry or song, to get at a feeling which is almost impossible to say directly in words.
Yes, but we always have to put it into words to explain ourselves afterwards. I mean, I suppose you could try and explain it in drawings. Like, what a song is basically about is about itself. And you can dissect it or say what it reminds you of, but certainly if you've written the song, probably the best way to describe the song would be simply to sing it, because those are the feelings that prompted it. But maybe that's why we sing some words rather than just writing them down as poems, because once you sing, it's kind of incantatory. It's an incantation. You're chanting. You're
manifesting almost.
You're manifesting. It's like I had a theory for a while that all songs were either invocations or exorcisms. You were either going, "I want you, come here, baby," or it's like, "Oh, hey, leave me alone. Get out of my life, woman. Whatever. Get out of my life, Trump. Just I want to destroy you." That kind of thing. It was. But again, I suppose the great songs are both. Vincent of Johanna's probably both. Then you're into the magical property of song, and then I suppose you're into what is magic, and that's another definition.
It's interesting when he said the word exorcism. My mind went in a different direction, an almost therapeutic one. And I think you were alluding to this a little bit, wherein for you, songs are a way of processing feelings and emotion that you don't necessarily even know that you have.
I hope so. I've always thought my songs knew more than I did, which worries me when I think they might be prophetic, because I don't tend to prophesy anything very good. But I think you definitely, I don't know. Like, if you know what you're going to say, why say it? Or alternatively, if you don't know what you're going to say, why say it? I don't know if you know, what does one know in advance? You discover it as it comes out of you, which is why I'm hesitant to say much about my songs for sure until I've known them for a while. But I'm just, because Shufflemania has come out, part of my job is to kind of define it to the world, because it's very hard to sell people things that can't be defined. Is this an orange or a peach, or could this cucumber be an avocado? You kind of, people prefer things when they're defined.
It sounds like for you, spontaneity is a very important process. Part of the process of creating as well is being open to these ideas when they come.
I have to be, because otherwise I lose them. I lose about 90% of my ideas because I don't write them down. I think, oh, that's a good song title, or that's a good line. And I then don't make a note of it, and it's all forgotten. And I have a very quick fire mind. It probably now would be defined as ADHD. I I'm aware of, if I don't grab an idea instantly or don't follow something up quickly, it'll just go. And I spend a lot of time trying to get things in the right order. It makes me more impatient, more hasty. And then that process then exaggerates itself because there's a new idea in the wings, waiting to nudge this one out of place. So if I don't catch it right then, it's gone.
I think a lot about this idea of not just inspiration, but almost channeling a muse or channeling some external force. I know, famously, I know that this is a very problematic figure now, but famously, Van Morrison used this approach in writing Astral Weeks of just sitting on a porch and the words almost sort of coming to him like he's speaking in tongues. But I wonder if we almost do a disservice when we leave the process entirely up to that, because obviously it creates a great deal of frustration in those moments when it doesn't come.
If it doesn't come, then I don't know. You just have to do something else. I mean,
you can't force it.
You can't force it. I know people, I've talked to other songwriters who will say, well, I've written some stuff, but they're fake. They're fake songs. They're not real. I say, what do you mean? And they'd say, well, they're just, I know they sound like songs, but they aren't really. And I thought, okay, I do know what you mean. And I can do that myself. I think I probably wrote a lot of them in the sort of 3 years between my last record and this one, 16, 17, 18, 19, whatever. I didn't write very much, but I was filling up notebooks, but I just haven't kept any of it. And I think they were just fake songs. And they weren't strong enough to make me go back to them. So, yeah, or you just got to do something else. I find it actually, once lockdown started, I started painting again, and that really helped me. I'd already started again, but that really helped me come up with more because I was focusing on the paint, and so the songs appear because no one's looking at them. I don't know. I mean, if you never feel inspired, then you probably shouldn't be in the business of inspiration.
If you're a fisherman who never catches anything, you should probably go into.
Maybe you can't. Yeah, maybe you should be doing something other than fishing. Yeah.
So it sounds like, to a certain extent, the role that painting plays for you is almost getting your mind off of the songwriting process. Maybe it's meditative in a sense, in that you can only truly be, that you specifically, and probably a lot of other songwriters, can really only truly be inspired when you're not thinking about songwriting.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I never write songs if I'm thinking about it. I simply realize that I am writing a song when I grab the notebook. Another great way to do it is to sing through a couple of cover songs. And sometimes if I've sung a couple of other people's songs, I'll have the guitar still warm in my hands, and then something else comes out, or I can even work on a couple of other songs of mine that aren't going anywhere and will probably be scrapped. And then suddenly the real thing comes through, but only because I'm really not looking for it. I also find if I do get 2 verses into a song, I start to get terribly self-conscious, and I think, oh God, I'm deciding what to do here. I'm deciding the direction and the fate of this. And so very often I just get stuck with 2 verses, and it's gone because I've become aware of what I'm doing. And I have a dream, which is an analogy of this, which is I think I'm flying, and I am flying. It's fantastic. And I get this maybe once or twice a week, and I'm basically swimming through the air. But then as I become aware of it, I sink closer to the ground, And in the end, I'm just swimming in the grass. Like people look down at me. What are you doing there? I'm swimming in the grass. Oddly enough, the fish in the grass in my other dream, which I actually put on the record, the Raging Muse. And I think that's to do with becoming aware of yourself, and then that self-consciousness just freezes you. I think I sort of have to not know what I'm doing, really.
This might be specific to art, the fine line between great art and just sheer ridiculousness. It's very thin at the end of the day. The line between flying in the sky and flying in the grass, it's a thin line.
Yeah. Well, there's nothing particularly noble about it. And you're going to have, you don't know if Dylan was halfway through Visions of Johanna and then just kind of, farted really loudly or something like that. Oh, blimey, I've got to go to the bathroom. This isn't good. You don't know what's happening in the middle of that. That's the most puncturing thing that could be happening.
It's so important to all these things that we imbue them with a certain level of mystique, because that's the magic.
Well, that's it. But because it's the best part of you, I don't want to be remembered for the person I was. I want to be remembered for the person that wrote those songs. I want people to think I had some kind of insight and I was good with words and melody, and they go, wow, look at that. He must have been an interesting guy. Not, oh, Christ, did you actually know him? Similarly, I don't think it would have necessarily been that much fun being around any of the greats, when they were being great, Bowie or Dylan or Lennon, or, they were probably all pretty ghastly at points, but probably able to be extremely charming when necessary. John had his good cop, Paul, and they had the Beatle mask from which they could all operate. Supposedly Shakespeare died after a drinking bout. He may well have been talking crap before he passed, I don't know. Was he, shall I compare thee to a summer's day or whatever, or was he just saying, Jesus Christ, it's your round, whatever, I don't know.
That's one of the big downsides, I think, of this technological and social media world that we live in, is that it's almost impossible to have that mystique. I don't know. Will there ever be another Syd Barrett or Captain Beefheart? Because everybody who makes music now, most of them are still very online.
Possibly. I mean, will there ever be a bright autistic Capricorn artist? Almost certainly. Will they be able to disappear the way Beefheart and Barrett did is another matter. They were both gone before the intense level of scrutiny that we have now was out and about. Now you'd probably...
They were both still around. They lived through it, but they were not involved in it.
They weren't involved in it, but they weren't, sort of an online sentinel standing outside their homes, actually videoing or, constantly. They probably, I don't know, like setting a trap for a badger or something. The infrared camera comes on. But I know what you mean. It would be hard for something to gestate, for somebody to gestate unseen and unknown. On the other hand, it's probably easier for them to get out, to make their work accessible. I mean, it's like everybody can put out a record now. You don't have to have a record deal. You don't have to be able to press it up. You just have to be able to operate the machinery.
There were other Beefhearts or Syd Barretts or Brian Wilsons out there who just didn't necessarily have the means to amplify themselves.
Well, they didn't have all the magical chemical ingredients that creates those people. Whatever it is, an indulgent or a cruel parent, somebody making them feel both really special and slightly inadequate, and definitely a fairly high level of at least what would be called Asperger's now. And all those factors, plus also the time, those three people conjured themselves up during an era that had an enormous amount of momentum. I don't know. Hopefully. There's an awful lot of interesting music coming out, which I unfortunately don't hear because I don't prioritize listening to music that I don't know, because I should, but I tend not to. I listen to music when I'm drawing, and I just tend to play LPs or whatever. My excuses are all rather lame. I think there's a lot of actually great stuff out there, and I would like to make myself more available to it. There's all kinds of people producing and listening to everything, but I suppose also there's so much of it, and so it's quite hard to know where to start. There was a time when there were only 17 indie singles, so you could buy or listen to all of them. There was a time when there were 23 hippie albums, so you could, it was a fixed corral. This rock and roll is as old as I am. There's 70 years of this stuff going back until it turns into blues and jazz. If you go from sort of Bill Haley up to whatever it is now, and it's not really rock and roll anymore, because rock and roll is an old folks medium. I mean, it's not really. Yeah, it is. It is. It's definitely. It's just stuff. It's for old folks. Sure, I'm still rocking. It's because I'm a senior citizen.
In reading a little bit up on this record, and obviously a 5-year gap is very unusual for you. You've been extremely prolific over your career, but I saw a mention of a burnout at one point, and I was thinking about that and about focusing on mental health, because I think that, obviously, and I mentioned Barrett and Brian Wilson and Captain Beefheart all in one breath. We have a history of really romanticizing the struggle. It goes back to Van Gogh, or probably even earlier than that. But I think there is a disservice there. I think there is a disservice that you feel like you need to be tortured or go through something terrible in order to make great art. But it sounds like, at least in the process of making this record, that you took time out for yourself and you focused on that burnout.
Well, I was touring a lot. I mean, I was working all the time. So I wasn't just sitting there worrying about songs. And I wrote a lot of songs, but I didn't think they were very good. And I also spent a lot of time working on some piano pieces that I still haven't finished, but they might be good, but they just never they're still congealing. So I might record them sometime. I'm about to go over the waterfall of 70. So I must have put my last record out when I was 64. That was all written in my early 60s. But those guys, they were done. Barrett was done with music at 22. Beefheart was done with music at 40. Brian Wilson still comes up with pieces, but
the masterpieces, he was done with the true masterpieces.
Also, those people were born on the wings of LSD and the other drugs. They had that sort of Faustian momentum that gave them incredible kind of insight. And I mean, they were talented people anyway, but it was like those drugs, they mortgage your future, just like drinking mortgages you're mortgaging tomorrow by grooving tonight. And but sometimes you have to. But it's I've said it before. I think Barrett just had he was like somebody who had a tube of talent, and he squeezed it out all raw onto the canvas. He didn't mix it up, didn't dilute it with turpentine. He just squeezed it all out, and then it was gone.
Concentrated.
It was concentrated talent in a way that most of us just kind of eke out a little bit here and there. Roger Waters does whatever he does, but because it was so constant, it was concentrate. And I think Beefheart was a bit the same. I don't know whether acid played a big part in it, but he was certainly burned out musically by the time he was 40. He produced an astonishing amount of work in the late 60s when he was brutalizing his young band members and running what now turns out to be a rather horrific cult, which is why they kind of fled him at various points. And if you meet surviving Magic band members, a lot of them have his characteristics. They'll sort of wear funny hats and they're like kids who've had an abusive school teacher or parent. They echo Don Van Vliet, but they also resent what he did to them. Brian Wilson, took prodigious numbers of drugs and had a terrible breakdown, and sort of because there was so much love for Brian, he's managed to keep going, and people just put him on stage and sing around him and back him up, and somehow he's just about doing it. But he was, he was writing Good Vibrations and Surf's Up and Heroes and Villains and all those extraordinary pieces of music. And, that is burnout. I never had that. I've had quiet periods, but I was also never born on the wings of acid like those people were. I took it occasionally, but I was aware that it was risky. I never thought, man, I'm going to go into this. I was always quite circumspect because I'd seen what it had done to other people. I was second generation. So I've done my share of grooving, but I've never kind of gone, hey, off we go.
It sounds like you've got a pretty good notion of whether it's better to burn out or fade away.
Well, I'm opting for the fade away. I am opting for the fade away, and I hope I'll be writing songs, from beyond the veil. I've spent my life doing this. I'd like to think that I've got many modifications I would go into for the next life. I would definitely be more physical. I'd learn to surf and skateboard. I would also do carpentry and grow plants. I'd be more three-dimensional in things rather than completely in my own head. But I'd like to carry on writing songs into the next world. I love it. It's what I made myself do because I listened to all those records as a teenager. And as a result, I'm still churning this stuff out 55 years later. But I'm lucky. I will continue doing this as long as I physically can, whether anybody hears it or not.